Hello, everyone, and welcome to this 8th lockdown Q&A. And today we're very privileged to have as our guest, Mark Nicholas. Now, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask John Fingleton to introduce him. But before we start, can I remind you all, please keep your microphones muted. You should be muted already. Please don't unmute yourself unless you're going to ask a question. The first 3 questions after John Fingleton has spoken will be from Tom Burridge, Lionel Frumpkin and Derek Wheeler. So if you can be ready to ask your questions. John, would you like to introduce our guest, please?
Thank you very much indeed, James. And ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to my old mate and yet another former president of the Heartaches Cricket Club. And I've known him for about 30 years and toured with him even in South Africa on one occasion, where he took a very, very unpleasant photograph of me not wearing too many clothes. But Mark's great success in life was being captain of Hampshire because he fulfilled the main requirement, which was to have 3 forenames, 3 initials, MCJ Nicholas. And you always have to do that if you're a Hampshire captain. But the maybe surprising thing about him is that his grandfather was captain of Essex. And who would have guessed that? Fred Nicholas. But he has been, and we all know, a very successful both player and commentator, and also a wonderful public speaker, a great moderator. He runs the Cowdrey Lecture every year, and he never has a piece of paper in his hand, never has a note, remembers it all or makes it up. I think he remembers it all. And he is a very, very accomplished presenter, as well as having been a great cricketer, who scored 206 not outs as his highest score in first-class cricket. He took 72 first-class wickets and 101 in limited overs. He had a batting average of 34.39, and he took 328 catches, which, as we all know, are what win matches. But I think that's enough from me. A very warm welcome, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, John. So our first question is from Tom Burridge. And I know that Tom, I don't want to preempt his question, but he's going to ask you about 3T. So perhaps before Tom asks his question, Mark, you could just tell us a little bit about what 3T is.
Okay, I'll actually just begin off the back of Finger's introduction, if I may, and say thank you very much for having me with you this evening. I've allowed myself a little glass of red wine. I've just come back from a long drive, picking my daughter up from deep in the country, so thank you. And I'm sorry it was delayed an hour because of that. John, you're wrong, of course. You certainly can be Hampshire captain with 2 initials. I'll highlight Lionel Tennyson, albeit the Honourable L.H. Tennyson. So I don't think the Honourable counts as an initial. But perhaps the greatest of all Hampshire captains, and if he wasn't, then we have to go to ACD Ingleby Mackenzie, who certainly was. And you were very kind, talking about moderation and stuff. The Cowdrey Lecture is something that's come to mean a great deal to a lot of us, actually. I think it spreads a terrific gospel. And I think the fact that the club continue to lead it in the way that they do through the Spirit of Cricket message is a very special thing. And of course, we've heard some incredible performances that evening, and I've just been lucky enough to bounce off the back of them. So there we are. So it's very nice to be with you. Yes, well, 3-team cricket it's quite an interesting short story. A great friend of mine who was a very good player in his day, didn't play first-class cricket, a very good South African who went on to be chairman of Rand Merchant Bank, then FNB, and now a data company called Rain, just came up with the idea in lockdown. He was chatting with Graham Smith and Mark Boucher, who are mates of his, about a 3-way game of cards they'd played at home in lockdown that no one had ever thought of playing 3 ways. They'd played it 2 ways and 4 ways, but never 3, and it worked. And he got to thinking about children and cricket, and he got to thinking 8 players aside, and then he got to thinking, could 3 teams somehow rotate in an 8 players per side game? And then he got to thinking how well that would work in schools and how well it would work in clubs that didn't have big playing memberships. and struggled for second and third teams at weekends. And then he got to thinking about the nuances of three teams playing in the same match, and how interesting it was that you may have a situation where the least good team on paper began with an advantage because the two best teams would want to strike each other off, i.e. use the best bowlers against the top batsmen, which would leave the lesser bowlers to bowl their overs against the third team, and they may be able to take advantage of that. That fascinated him. So with Graham and Smith and Mark Boucher, they came up with some ideas. They then put a presentation to me. I loved it because I've long searched for something that children could adapt to that isn't as long as 2020, that they could pick up anywhere and play easily in groups, rotating opportunity, but best of all, that all 8 players would have a chance to feature strongly in the match. One of the problems with school cricket and club cricket is that the best players do all the work. And sometimes 3 or 4 players are outliers really to the game and only come in if they get stick for a bad bit of fielding or whatever. And I rather like the idea of only 6 fielders rotating in 6 zones. So each of the kids would have a go in each zone. So long leg zone, mid-wicket zone, mid-on zone, mid-off, extra cover, third man. And I thought that was great. 6 overs in a 12-over side, 36-over match. And I thought, this is great. So we evolved it. And then we sort of rather by chance came up with the idea of doing something for COVID issues in South Africa, and maybe having a fundraising match, which would need big name players. So then we thought of the big name players playing a game that would showcase 3-team, 8-man COVID restricted cricket, the zones in other words, so that people didn't get too close to each other. And that evolved into the event that's happening on July the 18th. Where the 24 of the best players in South Africa will play in 3 teams. One of them captained by A.B. de Villiers, who's coming back to play in the match. Another by K.G. Rabada, and another by Quinton de Kock, which is a very interesting thing. And it's going to go out on television in quite a few countries. And we might be onto something. We're all, I think, searching for the best way to get other people playing the game. The game isn't quite what it was for young children. When I grew up, it was, rugby or football in the winter and cricket in the summer. It's not quite like that anymore. I've discovered quite a lot of interesting aspects of children's attitude to sport in my experience with the chance to shine. And I just love the opportunities potentially that this gave the game. I also think that its nuances and its tactics are fascinating. So I don't think it'll be as prescribed as some of the 20-over cricket that we watch. And I think it'll need good brains and will add to the appreciation of the viewer. So I'm quite interested and excited by it.
Well, Tom, I think I need to owe you an apology because I think Mark's answered a lot of the question that you had. But would you like to come on and just add to your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, James. And thank you, Mark, for doing this. Much appreciated. Yeah, as James said, you sort of rather preempted me a little bit. I was keen to get an explanation on the sort of context for 3T, and I think you've done that very eloquently and much appreciated. I suppose the logical follow-on is, why should we be getting excited about this? I think my instinct when I read the descriptor of it was quite confusing, particularly if you're more of a traditional mindset, perhaps, and it perhaps needed a bit of thought given to actually how the structure of the game would work. I mean, is this something we should really be getting excited about? Is there a pathway for it in the UK, do you think, beyond this showpiece in South Africa? And I suppose, what are the next steps after this event later on in July?
Great question. We don't know. We formed the company to own the IP rather than to think we could make any money out of it. It's certainly not. We've all worked very hard in the last 2 months. There are 8 shareholders in it, small holdings, and a big sponsor called Rain, which is the data company I mentioned earlier. We're certainly going to explore it because the more time we've spent on it, the more we like it as a game. Yes, I agree that on first glance, some of the rules, not all, some are a little bit complicated, particularly how the overs pan out, who can bowl when. I like last man stands very much. I've always liked that. We always played it as children. I don't think I ever played a street game. I lived in a London road. We didn't have a garden, and we played in the street all the time. Also on the beach on summer holidays. And last man stands was a very important part of our game, because otherwise, sometimes if you were half decent and still in, you wouldn't get a knock if all the others were bowled out. So I like that gladiatorial nature of somebody like, obviously, the obvious example would be de Villiers on his own against the opposition. I think my answer would be that cricket doesn't really belong to anybody. It's one of the beauties of it. We're all entitled to interpret it as we choose to. One of the things that I've loved about my life in cricket is the many formats that I've either played or seen played. At the highest level, single wicket, double wicket, 20 over, 30 over, 40 over, 50 over, 55 over, 60 over, and in 1962, 65 over. I think it's gone through many phases that it's adapted to very well. Cricket tends to satisfy as long as the balance between bat and ball is good. And I think this game will allow bat and ball to be good. Not necessarily in this first COVID zone restricting game, because I don't think there are enough fielders. And a part of our game is that you can either take 3 fielders from the dugout, or the captains could name 3 substitute fielders to make up a full gamut, so that it's not too easy for the batsmen. But certainly to adapt it for development countries, for schools, and as I mentioned, for the clubs that don't have strong memberships, I think it's got a great future. So I'm excited by it tactically. I'm excited by the fact that all 8 players get a big opportunity in this game. And I'm excited by the fact that it has flexibility to go into other levels of cricket that need a bit of a new inspiration. It might be difficult in England because of the 100. It may be that right now the 100 occupies that space. But this, we didn't build it specifically for any first-class format or position, really. We built it because it was a bit of fun in lockdown and we had some time to spare. And now we're going to play what we might call a beta game. So it's a dress rehearsal with all the big players to see how it pans out. And then we'd have to make decisions about our future ideas for it.
Thanks, Tom. Great question. Next question then is from Lionel Frumpkin.
Hello, Mark. Nice to see you again.
Lionel, great man. How are you?
Fine. Mark, in your book, A Beautiful Game, there's a nice plug for you. You describe Malcolm Marshall as your best friend in cricket. You also say you captained him more than anyone else. So, Mark, as you knew him that well, what, in your opinion, made Macca one of the greatest ever fast bowlers? And by the way, on last week's Q&A, Graham Gooch said that Malcolm was the best fast bowler he ever faced, ahead of Dennis Lillee and Wasim Akram. And just before I go, there's a nice little picture of you and Malcolm. You know that one?
Well, I do. It's a favourite picture. Do turn it round, then everybody can see the cover of the book.
There you go.
Now, interestingly, look at this. How different the paperback was.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's better. Okay, I'll let you answer about Malcolm Marshall.
Well, that's interesting. Graham and I would therefore pick the same 3 bowlers as the best, fast bowlers, the best that we've seen. In 4th place, I'd have Andy Roberts. And the reason I picked those 4 is their skill level. 5th place, Imran Khan. So they're my 5 most skillful. Richard Hadley and Glenn McGrath, Curtly Ambrose. All of them would compete for a place in my best team. But skill level, those are the bowlers are the best I've seen. Though I think Dale Steyn. Do I put James Anderson in the fast bracket? Yes, I think we have to put him in that bracket. High skill level. What Marshall did so well was keep improving. And I think when we look at talent, we see something natural and easy. I think to make the most of that talent and to keep being ahead of your opponent, keep thinking ahead of your opponent, is something that only the best are able to do, to add skills to their game. So he began at fast medium, whippy fast medium, and quite aggressive. and he always had a natural outswinger, which was odd given, well, not odd, I suppose, but given the fact he had quite a front-on action. He had to have a perfect wrist to get it to swing out and a perfect release, and he used his right arm and left arm fully in the completion of his action, which is one of the reasons getting through his action that way he could get it to swing out with great wrist position. And then he got really quick as he got stronger and a little older and used his run up better. He got really quick, and for a period from about 81 to 84 he was quick. I would put him up there with the fastest. And then he wanted to learn the in-swinger, and by learning the in-swinger he realized he'd begun to compromise the outswinger. He'd begun to push the ball. And when you push the ball that way rather than release it that way, you're not letting your wrist work properly. So he had to go back to work on the outswinger, and he did that in about 86. And by then, I think when he got the two together with pretty good speed, it made him remarkable, particularly, funnily enough, on pitches that didn't do a lot, because he bowled a wicked bouncer that skidded at you, which forced you back, and then he could get it up there and move the ball very late. He never moved the ball a lot. He wasn't a big curving out or in swinger, but he moved it enough, and at pace and in the right areas. That made him breathtaking. So I think continuing to improve. He got very frustrated when he lost pace. He came back in 88 to play very well against England, not being as quick, at times cut his run. And by then, he really was a master of late movement, in the way that we think of late movement with reverse swing. You see the ball, it seems to get 3/4 of the way down the pitch, and then it'll go. So he could do that with the orthodox fashion of swing. Now, oddly enough, Malcolm never bowled reverse swing. There was the odd occasion when he said to me, Cappy, I'm turning it around the other way and it's going a bit. But we'd never heard of the phrase reverse swing. And really all reverse swing means is you've reversed the ball in your hand. So instead of having the rough side going to the slips for the ball to swing that way, you put it on going to long leg, you know. So you just reverse the position of the ball, which is how it got the name reverse swing. Andy Roberts told me that he had used it a bit without knowing it in the mid-70s, quite early in his career. Sarfraz certainly had done the same, Imran the same. And I suspect there were bowlers, you know, I'm sure Fred Truman, the great swing bowlers, Rayland Wool, Alan Davidson, Fred. I suspect they did the same without even knowing it. But Malcolm didn't do it very often. And he turned it into a bit of a science, actually, so that he knew each batsman so well. A little movement would teach him something. He'd sometimes work them across the crease to see how they came across the crease. Did they come across the crease by going back and across or forward pressing across? He'd sometimes leave them leg side of the ball, bowl very, very straight, and see how early they shut the face. And if they shut the face of the ball very early, he might then straighten up, bowl closer to the stumps, bowl wicket to wicket, and then they'd be playing across the line too early rather than working with the angle too early, and that's harder to do. So he was a master of sort of thinking through a batsman, storing it in here, and he wouldn't, the incredible thing, you know, he wouldn't see a batsman for 3 years, and he'd walk out to bat, not someone you'd even think about, average county player, worthy doubtless, but average. And he'd say, I remember him. He likes to go leg side, or he goes inside out over extra cover or whatever. And then you'd all get excited because you'd think, wow, he's going to work him over. And of course, he so often did. You know, and another funny thing about him was that sometimes ordinary players got the better of him because he hadn't seen them before and he hadn't had time to work them out. And there was a guy from Surrey called Ray Ali Khan. He couldn't get out. But he'd rather have bowled at Viv Richards, you know. It's a funny sort of thing. Maybe he needed the bigger challenge and the bigger stage. But he just learned. I think the answer to your question is he learnt and he kept learning. He kept very fit, not by running, didn't run at all, hated the idea of running, thought it would hammer his key joints, ankles, knees, hips. So he didn't run, he did sit-ups. And he did 200 in the morning, or was it 250, whatever it was, he did, I think it was 400 a day. So he did 200 in the morning and 200 in the evening, and he bowled a lot in the nets. And when you faced him in the nets, you knew you were in a contest because he turned everything into a little game situation. So his practice was game prepared.
Lovely.
Thank you,
Mark.
Lionel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Derek Wheeler now has a fairly controversial question for you. Derek.
Hi, Mark. What the hell's Max Sawyer doing on there?
Sorry.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us. I'm getting very excited because my football team's just won. They're Fulham. They won 1-0. So I'm also having a glass of wine.
Were you at the first game that George Best played?
I was.
Do you remember he scored in the first minute?
Yes, he did. And do you remember the next game?
I was in the crowd outside. We couldn't get in. There were so many people trying to get in. So we thought at half time, we thought the score was 0-0. It was only when we were getting a beer and the Fulham boys, George Best. Fulham.
Next match, Rodney Marsh and Best played against Oxford, and they ended up tackling each other. It was ridiculous, but there you go. Anyway, thank you. I want to ask a bit about boring MCC and committees. When we receive the annual forms for the committee and for membership of the committee, there's usually several cricketers. And guess what? They usually come first or second in the poll. This year it was Gus Fraser. I think it was Mike Brady last year. You certainly were at the top there with them. Was it Simon Hughes? So we get a lot of cricketers on the committee. And my first question is, we're a cricket club. Is that the correct thing when you think of all the talent there is within the club? And secondly, what's your view on having blind nomination? Because the second thing people do is they look and they may not know this person, but he's sponsored by Mike Atherton. So my question is, do we have too many cricketers on the committee? And should we think of maybe a system that's allowing people that may be more member focused? There's a couple of guys I think on here tonight who've stood in the past who we know, who I think will do a very good job. One's John Hegarty, but they're not going to get very far because they're not endorsed by a cricketer or they've never played first class cricket.
Well, I think there's a good balance at the moment. We've got Mike Brearley, Simon Hughes, Nick Pocock, myself, Gat, but Gat's there, of course, as chairman of the MCC World Cricket Committee, rather than as voted on at the moment, though he's a former president, of course. And then Claire Taylor. We've got people from various parts of the business and commercial world. I think the balance is pretty good at the moment. I think as a cricket club, you want a combination of business, industry, commerce, and cricket, and you want it in about an even measure. Certainly, a lot of the business concerns the day-to-day running of a club that has global influence and global sitting. So we certainly need good brains. I'm very impressed by coming back on the committee as I did, a year and a half ago, about 20 months ago. I've been really enjoyed it. Really liked the effort, the attention, the minds. I've loved it, and I'm very impressed. I would argue the balance is about right. I suppose, I don't know, what you're saying is, are you voting for because you're well known? And does it help if you have well-known proposers and seconders? I don't know. I mean, I've seen one or two not get on that have surprised me. No, I like the system in general. I think that the ideas of governance to change it makes sense. To have a tighter, more streamlined, more skills-based committee. I think that there's merit in that. But in general, I like it. I've been fascinated by the views of people not in cricket as well. I would say that the system's not far wrong, but it's going to change by definition now if we go to a new form of governance.
Yeah, got that. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Derek. Next up is Max Sawyer. Max, you've got two questions, I think, for Mark. Could you ask one of them, and we'll come back to you for the second if we have time at the end?
Yep, that's fine. Good evening, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Go with the whole together.
What did you and your fellow commentators think of Muralitharan's bowling action? And in this context, what did you think of the way Jack Leach was treated by the ECB?
Murali was, did you ever see a thing I did on Channel 4 with him in a plaster?
Yes.
Wasn't that amazing? I'll never forget it till the day I die. So there he was. We put this thing with, and it had steel strips down it, and we wrapped it around him and put him in it. And then he bowled this doosra, obviously with the arm dead straight. Now, what I would say is that the ball didn't go with either the doosra or the off spinner with quite the fizz that it does when he's got the 15-degree allowance. Murali's quite unusual. So he's got, most of us, we rotate our shoulder. It's not right to say that it's vertical, but it rotates that way. Whereas Murali can rotate his shoulder horizontally. So he can bowl with his shoulder going like that, right? Then he's double jointed in this arm, and he has like a rubber wrist. And so everything that he does from here through these joints into here is different, incredibly strong fingers. And it was up close and filmed very tight. You couldn't say that you thought his action was pure, but you certainly couldn't say that his action seemed to me to be illegal. And once it was passed by the authorities, to me, that was the end of the matter, whether right or wrong. And the person I've spoken to most about this is Shane Warne, who's very interested. You know, once it's passed, he can't be blamed. I don't really know. I mean, they brought in that 15-degree rule, and that gave bowlers leeway. Should bowlers have 15-degree leeway? Oh, I don't know about that. That's a completely different issue, isn't it? But it does seem to have softened. It seems easier now to pin down problem bowlers, and it seems to have softened what was an ongoing and became quite a political problem, of course, with Murali, but also became quite an unpleasant issue. Whereas I think now people know clearly where they stand with the 15-degree limit. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Max. We will come back to you if we've got time at the end. Next question then from Simon Doff. Simon, you're on the mic.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I've noticed at Lord's, since I've been a member in 2003, that we've had improvements to the outfield. So when it rains, you know, the players get back on quickly. We've now got floodlights. So when it's cloudy, they can still play. But there doesn't seem to have been any improvement to the standard of the wicket. I think we've got a wicket at the moment that has little pace, little bounce. And batsmen are finding it very difficult to time their shots. And I think that's having a detrimental effect on the matches played at Lord's. And you in those Spin, which you co-authored with Shane Warne, you said many times about the importance of good quick wickets. And Simon Wilde, in his England the biography, said that World Series cricket in Australia in the late 70s had a lot of success with drop-in wickets when they were grown under glass. Do you think this is something that that the game to look at?
Those pitches, a lot of the drop-ins were very uneven to start with. Do you remember Andy Roberts broke David Hooks's jaw, for example, off a ball that really wasn't that short? They became good pitches. One or two worked very well, but in the second year of World Series, when they were able to play, for example, at the Sydney Cricket Ground, not at the Sydney Showground, the cricket was better for it, to be honest. So I don't mean to take issue with Simon at all, but I clearly remember some pretty indifferent pitches, particularly in places like the Sydney Showground and the one in Perth, which was also next door to the Wacker, and I've forgotten its name. I thought that it was so interesting, wasn't it, that World Cup final where the players couldn't time the ball, the pitch that moved around a lot in the test against Ireland, the slower nature of the pitches last summer. And I don't know, I mean, God, pitches are such a mystery. Going back a while, we had some quite, quick might be wrong in terms of, say, the Wacker or Brisbane, but pretty good bouncy pitches at Lord's. Do you know when the best one I can remember was, which is really interesting, was after the 2012 Olympics, when they'd had there was no cricket played until about now. So it'll be very interesting when Lord's has had a whole year off to see whether those tired pitches have recovered some of their life and zest with the fact that they've had a break. The new groundsman is absolutely outstanding. He's come from Hampshire, from the Aegeus Bowl, and he really knows what he's about. So he's now that was his first summer last year. Gosh, he had a lot on his plate with the Ashes and the World Cup matches and stuff. My own view is a simple one: pitchers get tired. I think they're like all of us. In the end, they wear out a bit, and the cells are diminishing, and our hair falls out, and pitches get worn out. And I think drop-in pitches are a very good idea, with one proviso. Most drop-in pitches are made with the same soil, and you tend to make them so that they're compact and don't break up. And the problem with that is no natural deterioration. So you don't bring different bowlers into the game and different batting skills into the game. And a clear example is one I think of was the last Ashes series in Australia. The Boxing Day test in Melbourne was played on a drop-in pitch. And it was the dullest game of cricket imaginable. Both sides got huge first innings scores. The ball was deadish, not totally dead, because you could hit it for 4, but the bounce was sort of no more than waist height. There was no real deviation sideways. So drop-in pitches, you need to be very sure of the soil you're using and how you're using it and where you're using it. Dropping in a pitch at the Oval would be different from dropping in a pitch in Manchester, for example. So you need to know your stuff. But I think where it's really useful is where you've got tired surfaces or where you're playing on football grounds in foreign countries. But here, there's a lot of county grounds that use the same square for a very long time. It took Hampshire, there's an example of a new ground actually, it took Hampshire a long time to get their pitches right. They were effectively drop-ins and they were terrible the first 2 years. Ask Robin Smith, or someone like that, who played there, having come from Northlands Road, and they were really difficult pitches, really almost unfair pitches, too bowler heavy, and they took a long time to pan out. So there's merit in them, but you need to work with the soil that is specific to the square that you're playing on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A nice segue there, because Peter Hart, I think, wants to ask you about Robin Smith. Peter.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to see you. Robin Smith, I love your touching foreword that you wrote in Robin Smith's book, The Judge. Robin was, one of my cricketing heroes. I mean, to watch him get on the front foot against the formidable West Indian fast bowlers, 9 test centuries, etc. And did his test career end prematurely? Keith Fletcher had said something that he had too many fingers in too many pies. In terms of Hampshire, I mean, you said he was the greatest Hampshire cricketer rather than the greatest cricketer who played for Hampshire, and someone you would go to the trenches with. He captained for 4 years, and then Hampshire released him in 2003. And as we know, sadly, his life collapsed around him. His drinking was out of control. He'd moved to Australia. Sadly, his brother and his father just didn't know what to do. And then this very nice lady, Karen, seemed to have saved him when she saw him drinking on his own by a swimming pool and offered him a sofa bed. And I believe he's now sober and living a positive and constructive life, which is very inspiring. Did you detect in his cricket an inner sensitivity or an insecurity, behind the bravado and the sort of, the portrayal of total courage, sort of similar to Alan Lamb? I think he said himself, we're all human and some of us are fragile. I'd love your thoughts, Mark, and also love the chapter in your own book on the Smith family. They were good friends of yours, yes?
If I said, could you repeat that, that would be difficult, wouldn't it?
I didn't hear it.
Right.
I could.
Okay. Here's this very special guy, very young, arriving at Hampshire, very insecure, lived in South Africa, help around the house, arrives in England, is a fantastic player. I mean, he came to us at 16 and he was jaw-droppingly good at 16. I mean, far better than any of us. And you thought, right, what, like I said about Marshall, he kept improving. Robin did keep improving, but not ongoingly through his career. He came a little bit hard on the ball, a bit regimented in his movements. And as he learned more and knew more, so the world became more difficult for him. The complexities of life, the uncertainties, the demands, the expectation weighed heavy on a really sensitive, charming, kind person. They say you have to be a bit of a shit to make it to the top. Well, he made it to the top and he was anything but a bit of a shit. He's as lovely a guy as you'd ever meet. He turned to alcohol. He had a drinking mate on a tour that England didn't play very well on, and Keith Fletcher and Ray Illingworth sort of decided that he was going too far that way, and they wanted some younger players brought in, and so he was moved aside. And yes, he had a lot more cricket left in him, but at the time, you could see why even someone who valued him as dearly as Michael Atherton valued him was tempted to say this has gone too far. And the only way to teach him that is by saying we're not playing you. But he never got back in, that was the problem. He actually, his last test innings in Cape Town was a very good one against a good attack on an awkward surface. And I thought that would get him into the side for the start of the next summer, but it wasn't to be. Frustrating. Has he stopped drinking? He's totally stopped drinking. He is studying, he's doing a degree in psychology. He has his own coaching clinic that he does every afternoon. He works for his brother Chris, who has an embroidery business in the morning. He has this lovely girl, Karen, in his life. He lives in the same block as his two children who adore him. He couldn't be in a better space given what he's been through. This is a guy, you've read the book, but if you haven't, the book opens with the story of his thoughts of suicide, and not just that he might do it, but how he would complete the job. It's quite an alarming read. And the great thing is, and funny enough, he only rang me, what's today, Tuesday, he rang me on Sunday, and we had a lovely chat. He's in great shape. He's very positive about life. He's loving his coaching. He's just in wonderful form. Karen's been very good for him. And yes, in answer to your question, he could have played more for England, but he brought a bit of that upon himself. What he needed was great sympathy, people around him that understood him. And probably in that England environment at that time, they didn't wrap their arms around him in the way that his county did. And it was his county he could go on playing for, not his country or his adopted country.
Thank you. The next two questions on the same subject. So can we ask them both before you answer, Mark? They come from Noel Kearns and Tony Curry. Noel, would you like to go first? And then Tony, you can come in afterwards. Noel.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I on or not? Am I on?
Yes, you're on, Noel. We're waiting anxiously to hear you.
Thank you very much indeed. Hello, Mark. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Thank you very much. Listen, we enjoyed your interesting chat with Gerald before the elections, and it was, interesting and so forth, but you still ignored, the both of you, the biggest elephant in the room, which is, what the hell are we ever going to do with the man that owns the freehold for the tunnels? Why
is
it so difficult for you and... Sorry?
So it isn't a freehold, it's a head lease. Railtrack own the freehold.
Okay, the head lease.
This kid owns the head lease, we have an under lease.
Thank you very much for instructing me, James, to be careful about what it is, the head lease or the freehold. But Mark, am I back with you? Thank you.
Yep.
Am I back with you? You know, why the hell are we not dealing with this stupid elephant in the room? I mean, such an elegant conversation you had with our chairman, but nobody is actually dealing with the fact that we need to deal with this head lease.
Well,
perhaps Tony Curry could just come in now and ask his question. Then you can answer them both together. Tony.
okay, yeah.
Hi, Mark. Thanks very much for your time on this. Really appreciate it. Yeah, it's pretty much the same as Noel's. It is, what would it take to get MCC and Mr. Rifkin around a table to discuss the areas of mutual development opportunities and to, importantly, agree the next steps that need to be taken?
Well, in answer to the first question, that's simple. The chat with the chairman that was sent out before the AGM was purely about life membership. It wasn't designed to cover any aspect of the club's business. It was for Gerald to have a chance to put the message across to the membership that he passionately believed in and had such strong support from the committee about. So that was the sole purpose of that. We weren't covering other club business. So I hope that answers your question about the interview. So we didn't see that as an elephant in our room in that conversation. So that's number one. Number two, we, as you're all well aware, Charles put a proposal through Baroness of Scotland, who wrote to Kumar Sangakkara, the president, with that proposal about a hospital instead of the flats. And the deal really wasn't good enough. We felt as a committee, we took it to our chartered surveyors, CBRE, who agreed. The membership had voted 90% against the Morley plan only in 2017, and we didn't feel that we'd had anything to improve the potential of that deal, and therefore it wasn't necessary to take it to the membership. Is there look, I do think personally down the road, yes, I mean, I rather agree that one's going to have to organise something with Charles. MCC missed their moment in the late 90s, primarily because of debt after the media centre and the grandstand. And that was a mistake. I don't think anybody would do that now. I firmly believe that there would be a way forward with Charles, but certainly not on any of the terms that have so far been offered. We feel pretty comfortable at the moment. I think the life membership thing will work well. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out. My feeling is it'll work well, and we'll be able to solve this very tricky problem of the ongoing development of the Compton and Edridge stand and the black hole created by the lack of revenue this year. And I think down the track, you're dead right. We have to find a way to solve that ongoing issue. Charles is he introduced himself to me. We agreed we'd met before a couple of years ago before a Cowdrey lecture. We're all passionate about this club. And I think you're right. I think we need to find a way, but I don't know what that way is right now. I think we're in a strong position. I think we're going to be well placed financially through the life membership scheme. And I believe that we're a long way off the right deal for MCC. So a new deal will have to be found.
Thank you. The next question then is from Debashish Biswaz. I hope I pronounced your name right, Deb.
Yeah, that's fine. That's a good effort.
Thank you.
I'm not on mute. Yes.
No, you're
hi,
not.
Mark. Hello, and thank you, Mark, for your time on this. This is very interesting to hear your thoughts in a number of areas. My question's sort of around your commentating. What country do you prefer commentating in or from, and why? And then the other part that I'm more interested in, do you find that you adapt for your audience and especially if you have to consciously change when you're moving country to country. So I'm sort of thinking about, I know that there are going to be different levels of editorial oversight and between countries, and it's going to be different from now compared to when you started. So I'm really more concerned about the bits and pieces beyond that editorial sort of direction that you might get.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, thank you for the question. I'm very lucky because I love cricket. I would, if you ask me what I'd like to do tomorrow, I'd like to go and watch a day's cricket. I love cricket. I wouldn't mind. I'm thinking of playing again, actually. So to commentate, of course, is the ultimate treat. But I'm pleased to be there. If you said to me every morning I've commentated, where would you most like to be in the world? It would be there. That's where I'd most like to be. So that's a great starting point. Something that Richie used to say, and I learned that from the great Richie. I didn't learn it from him. I knew it in myself, but it was interesting to hear it too. Where do I most like commentating? I couldn't pick a place because each has its own charm and attraction. If you ask me the ground I like being at most, it's Lord's, followed by the Sydney Cricket Ground. They're the top two by quite a distance, because you really can sort of feel the ghosts of the game. Lord's, I mean, clearly a very special view but I actually started doing some games for the BBC when Hampshire were knocked out of cup matches in the very early 90s, maybe even late 80s. And so I was up at that very top bit, if you remember, which is now a restaurant of the Warner stand. So you didn't even have a bit, you weren't even behind the arm. Commentary's changed a lot. Nowadays, with so many gizmos, so much technology, you tend to have to say more to explain it. And also producers want more. The audience seems to want more. The days of less is more. I wouldn't say they've gone. I still think the best in the world give you less is more, but there's definitely more talking on commentary, particularly if you listen to watch some of the old films, listen to the commentary. In India now, if you don't talk non-stop over every ball, you have a producer in your ear telling you to say something. You know, what are we paying you for? India is an amazing place to work because of the passion. The commentary boxes often don't have a glass front to them, so you're open to the audience, which is far preferable to being in a hermetically sealed room. The skills of it have changed a bit. We've worked over the years very hard at Channel 9 and Channel 4 at the ebb and flow of the day. You want different things in the morning from the afternoon to the evening. For example, on a weekday afternoon, you're talking mainly, well, not mainly, but you're talking to women and children more than, say, at a weekend or a late part of the afternoon when dads have come home. There are parts of the day you need to do more updates, parts of the day you need to do more technical explanation, parts of the day you need to keep it more simple and a bit more fun, parts of the day where you might do more player profile stuff than other times. And I think you have to work with the action. So you move, ideally, with the pace of the game. There's no point in you commentating up here, going nuts, if actually the game's down here because you've got nowhere to go when it does get up there. So we've made studies of that at both 4 and 9. Something Tony Gregg was very big on. People think Tony Gregg shouted and screamed a lot. Actually, Tony made a real study. He'd look at his audience figures at different times of the day and try to get a feel for the demographics and how to respond to them. There was one other interesting point you asked, and I've sort of forgotten what it was. But I feel that my life as a commentator has been a gift. And Richie always used to say, you're a guest in someone's room. So for God's sake, don't irritate them. I understand that at times when I've been a bit over-hyper, over-enthusiastic, I must have been very irritating. And I think I've toned down a bit now, perhaps, and give a little more information and wait for the moment to pounce on my great excitement. I don't criticize myself for being over-enthusiastic, but if I could wind back the clock and start again, I think I'd be less theatrical, and that might be less irritating. But equally, I do think there were times when I gave cricket a little rush of excitement that perhaps others mightn't have done, and I'm quite proud of that. I'm proud of the Channel 4 years where I believed we brought a new way of broadcasting the game to people that people seem to thoroughly enjoy. And overall, I look back and say that beyond the thrill of the experience, I too have learned and adapted, and probably still will.
Thank you. Well, we're sticking with broadcasting. Derek Tomlin. Derek, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. Yes, I would. Mark, with your extensive knowledge of broadcasting, please explain how the technicians, the cameramen, the commentators will maintain social distancing throughout the forthcoming test matches. The players have all been in quarantine, but what about all the other people required to stage an event like this?
Well, firstly, to tell you, I don't know because I'm not there. Channel 5 lost the rights, so they've gone to the BBC now. I haven't been hired by the BBC, so I won't be there. It won't be difficult in the commentary box to be 2 meters apart, and the producer to be 2 meters behind, and the graphics guy can be that end, and the scorer can be that end, and that would be very straightforward. So I see no problem inside a commentary box. In the media center, they're going to space people, 2 people apart, and they'll limit numbers. So actually, for West Indies and Pakistan, it would be a big problem if it was Australia, because you'd have such a huge media. But for those countries, that's straightforward. In radio, you're going to have a lot of people hanging around. So I think probably you'll have your your commentator, your summarizer, and your scorer on the front bench, your producer behind, your assistant producer to the right, and then you might allow one other commentator in there waiting for a stint, but others might have to be outside the box, actually. You'll have to sit no more than 2 to a table, I would imagine, at lunch. You'll have to stagnate how you arrive. I imagine each will be given times to appear. I imagine there'll be less interviews with players, though what you could do is what they've done in golf, which is they've set up a locked off microphone, and the player stands behind that, and then the interviewer is 2 meters alongside, basically alongside the lens of the camera, which is nice because actually you see the 2 eyes of the golfer. So maybe they'll do that. That would make sense to do that with the cricketers. And of course, the other beauty is that they're playing at 2 grounds with new facilities, so there is space. It's not like you're in a pokey old Eve. I mean, if it would have been difficult, for example, impossible actually, had we been in the Warner stand in the old commentary boxes at Lord's. So I think at the Ageas Bowl in the hotel there, they've got a lot of room, no problem, and they've got plenty of room in Manchester too. So actually, I think they'll pull it off.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Right, next question then from Chris Biddle. Chris, you're on the mic.
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening even. I was actually proposed for the MCC back ages ago by another of your predecessors with 3 initials, and it wasn't ACD. It was EDR, 1961, when actually we, as rather Hampshire, won the championship, and I was there at Dean Park when Danny Livingstone caught Bob Taylor. And just as a little plug for the cricketer, what a wonderful picture on the front of the cricketer this month of a composite of a one-day game set against the background of Dean Park.
Oh, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely terrific. Mark, my very simple question is, in 1987, you had to make a choice of reducing your overseas players from 2 to 1, and you had to make a choice between Gordon Greenidge and Malcolm Marshall. How difficult was that?
Very straightforward. We had the greatest fast bowler in the world, and bowlers win you matches. It was very painful, a dreadful experience, to be honest with you, to be the captain behind the decision. I feel my relationship with Gordon was strained for a long time. It's very good now. In fact, he kindly asked me to do something for his charity for children in Barbados. And we had a wonderful event last year. I interviewed Virat Kohli on the stage, and Gordon, and great. But it was difficult for a time. I mean, Gordon's role at Hampshire from 1973 right through to 1987 was extraordinary. I wrote a big piece on him on Cricinfo. My last piece on Cricinfo was about playing with Gordon, and particularly highlighting some of his extraordinary innings, not least the one. I love this story. We played on a wet pitch at Northampton, and Northants won the toss and put us in. And there were 4 test bowlers on the Northants side. And Paul Terry, who had a good technique and a back foot technique, played really well on the wet pitch, because of course we weren't brought up playing on uncovered pitches, that he understood how to play back and to wait for the ball and play softly. And Paul raised his bat for 50, and we stood on the balcony and applauded him when he got 50, because it was a masterful innings. When he raised his bat for 50, Gordon Greenwich was 202 not out. Can you imagine? I mean, we'd never seen anything like it. We got 320 or 30 for 2 declared, and we bowled them out, you know, and won the match by an innings, by a mile. Incredible player, very difficult decision, but actually, sorry, a very difficult thing to do, but not a difficult decision is the answer to your question.
And if I might just say, lastly, I've got this book by Pat Symes where he wrote about the biography of Mako, and your eulogy at St Michael's in Barbados is in there, and it was one of the best pieces of writing I've read. So thank you for that.
Well, that's sweet of you. And that was, imagine the privilege, really. I mean, a dubious privilege in some ways, but to be asked to give the eulogy. There were 2,000. There was no place of worship big enough, so they turned the Gary Soper Sports Hall into a place of worship for the day. There were a huge amount of people in there. I mean, I don't know how many, but over 1,000. And then the streets were lined as the coffin was taken down the streets. It was filmed live and shown in the Caribbean and broadcast live on radio. And I had to follow Viv Richards to the lectern. And Viv broke down and couldn't finish. To see Viv Richards bring a handkerchief to his eye, and then me to go up and speak, and then Wes Hall followed me. His opening line, Wes of course became a man of the church and a great preacher, as you can imagine, character. And his opening line, as he walked up, he said, "Malcolm Denzel Marshall was the greatest fast bowler that ever lived. And the only one thing that Wesley Hall truly knows about is fast bowling." And it was just, and he sort of broke the ice in the room. The rest of us had just performed and got away with it. And he broke the ice in the room, and everybody collapsed laughing. But I remember looking down, God, heart pumping, and I'm getting into it and trying to tell a few Malcolm stories. And I look down, I can see Roberts, Garner, Holding, and Croft. And I thought, oh, and they're looking like broken men, you know. And I thought, oh my God, don't let all these people down. So thank you.
Thank you. And a question just been asked on the chat from Andrew Louted. Andrew, you're on the mic if you'd like to come in.
Hello, Mark.
Hi.
Although he only had 2 initials, how highly did you rate Warne's captaincy of Hampshire? And do you think he should have captained Australia? Oh, I've stumped you.
Do I think he should have captained Australia? It's a risk, isn't it? It's a risk. Brilliant tactician, brilliant. Maybe the best. I've sat with a few. Chappell and Boycott, very good. Barry Richards, very good. Ian Chappell. Sorry, I just said Ian Chappell. Ian Chappell. Martin Crowe, exceptional. Ted Dexter, amazing. Brain for the game. Mike Brearley, you know, God, a few. Michael Vaughan, I mean, God. But maybe Warne sees into the game the best. Sees how a game will pan out earlier than most. I think that's one of his gifts. As a leader, you certainly followed him. He led A by example and B by inspiration, and obviously his actions, but his words too. He had high standards. That compromised 1 or 2 lesser players who found it very difficult to live up to his expectations of them, but only a few. And there tends to be a fallout from very strong-minded captains. I mean, the problem was he got into trouble off the field. As captain of your country, is that a risk you take? maybe you do. Maybe that's when he pulls his head in. There were good options, different types of men. Steve Waugh, Ricky Ponting, different types of men. I think it was very difficult for them after the incident with the diuretic, 2003. So I think it had to have been before then. God, I can't. You know, I'm seriously waffling on here. I think it's a good question and a hard one. But brain-wise, yes. And he was wonderful at Hampshire because he gave them belief. He played very hard. You know, I was rather light. I never took. Some people took our nickname as Happy Hants as an insult. To us, it meant we were soft. I didn't feel in my time we were soft. I don't call Marshall and Greenwich and Smith brothers and people soft. I think we didn't have the support voters to Marshall to win the championship, and I'm not sure they quite had the support voters to Warren to win the championship, though they got within half a point of doing it when Stephen Fleming's Nottingham just got over the line. He did an amazing job. He was captain there for 4 years, and they became a powerful and respected team. And I mean, you really can't do much more than that. He might have won more trophies. He might not have won. Sometimes the roll of the dice, for whatever reason, you know, we might have won the championship in 1985, but there was a good reason for that. We didn't quite finish off enough games. That was our fault. Though we had a couple of rain-affected games that sort of derailed us. But I mean, amazing. The guy's an inspiration. He's high maintenance. I did a book with him. He tells a great story. He's a remarkable human being. I think he's high maintenance, which sometimes is difficult as a captain to the players. But my goodness me, a force of nature if ever there was one.
Thank you, Mark. We've done an hour. Would you be prepared to take one further question? Because I know that Max has a supplemental for you.
Oh, I'm very happy to keep going. If you want to do it.
Max, would you like to ask your second question?
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. Why is there still no live cricket on free-to-air TV at a time when participation is in serious decline?
Bite my tongue. Well, because the ECB took the decision to take the money. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of live cricket on the BBC, isn't there? I think there are going to be some games in the 100. God, you've really trapped me here. I feel that's the meanest question I've been asked. I think Sky. I'm a great golf watcher, and I watch golf on Sky all the time. I'm a Tottenham supporter, and Fulham's my second team. I watched Tottenham last night. I don't. Sky must bid for what they want to bid for, and if they bid enough money, they'll get it. And well done them. And their support in this country is phenomenal. But it's a terrible shame. And I think that they should have, my view is that they could have made a little less money out of the deal and put a little cricket on terrestrial television to see how it works, to see if there was an obvious change. The big difference now is that at the end of 2005, albeit it was an extraordinary summer of cricket, but there's a park over there called Battersea Park, and everywhere you look, there were people playing cricket of all ages. I don't just mean in the nets and on the field and on the pitches. I mean, just in the field, in the way you have a knock-up game of football, there were knock-up games of cricket. There are the beach in the summer holidays down in Cornwall, or we used to go to the Isle of Wight, or to Chelsea. They're the three places I've been. Cricket was being played on the beaches. And there isn't now in the same way. And it's been a struggle with Chance to Shine, to get children integrated in the game, because it's not naturally in their lives in the way that it used to be. If you flick on the main channels, you find it and choose to watch it. But when it's on satellite TV, it becomes an appointment to view. And I think it's really sad. And I think Tom Harrison's terrific. I mean, great guy, but it breaks my heart. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Well, the last question then is from John Wilson. John, you're on mic now.
Mark, good evening, and thank you for doing this. Firstly, can I say how much I've enjoyed the podcast Rain Delay, and I wish you'd done more than 10. I particularly enjoyed.
Well, you can advise me. I've got a question for you in a minute, then, so don't go away.
No, it really has been a most enjoyable series. Mervyn King was the one I especially enjoyed. I'm in the finance world, so that was great, and he was a boy who grew up in my area, so I was near
Well, it was
Wolverhampton. So
all of us thickos finally got a proper explanation of quantitative easing, didn't we? Which
even we experts got an explanation of quantitative easing, to be honest. The other podcast that's running at the moment, which I've also equally enjoyed, has been Calling the Shots, and I know you briefly featured on that as well. And it kind of opened my eyes to they were calling them the pirate broadcasters, with Test Match Sofa, etc. Could you just talk about, do you think that group of individuals and that movement, if you like, had a significant impact on the traditional broadcasters? And similarly, Packer and how he and his initiative changed the game of cricket and indeed broadcasting, and what your thoughts are around that in hindsight?
Well, Packer had a very had a brilliant producer, a guy called David Hill, who is commonly thought to be the best cricket producer ever, and if you like, the standard bearer for the new way of explaining the game better to the people and turning it from observation to entertainment. Packer himself knew a lot about television. His father, Frank Packer, was a newspaper man. Kerry was a television man. And Kerry watched television all the time and had a very strong view of how television should look and what the messages were and what your job was. He loathed, what's the phrase, God, I had a blank on the phrase, but he loathed it when you talked amongst yourselves. Kerry's thing was you're the middleman between the product, which is the game, and the audience at home. So you're the conduit between the two. And that's a great thing to think about. And Kerry pushed that very hard. I suppose that by changing the nature of cricket, by making it more commercial, by putting it on a channel that showed an advert at the end of every over without fail and the fall of every wicket without fail, and 3 adverts at the fall of every wicket actually in the longer period of the break. He changed the way commentary took place on TV because you had to get everything into the 6 balls. So people were talking more by definition to get their stuff in, because the way in radio used to be that the commentator did the 6 balls, and then at the end of the over the summariser would come in with his view. And in that 6 balls, the commentator would describe the scene, paint the picture, and describe the scene. And that changed in cricket with 9. Certainly the guys were talking a bit more and in that little short space. And that spread around the world. India, the subcontinent in general, loved that. Took a long time for it to come here. England still had the more, if you like, old-fashioned way of doing it. I don't. But what were you asked? The first thing you asked about was
yes, the Calling the Shots podcast and the pirate broadcasters of Test Match Sofa, etc.
I mean, the guys on Calling the Shots are great. I mean, they did. You say I had a brief part in it. I actually ended up with 2 shows of my own, I think, almost on Calling the Shots about the history of commentary, which was really fun and interesting to do. I don't think the Test Match Sofa guys, I thought it was very clever what they were doing, but I don't remember them changing. I mean, I have listened to very little radio, you see, because I've always been in the commentary box alongside.
Sure.
So I don't really know if they've changed radio much. Maybe they did, made it a bit looser. I don't know whether it's any more laddish. I mean, I've done some TalkSport radio, and we've been accused of being laddish. Actually, last winter in South Africa, I thought we got to grips with that pretty well. TalkSport want a slightly different thing from the Beeb, which is more of a lad sporty thing. Who's changed broadcasting the most? I think probably in the end India now, as India became more confident as a nation, so its people became more outspoken, so its commentators became more entertainment driven, less deferential, more opinionated. India is the leader in the market of website interaction and writing. And I mean, a lot of cricket commentary is still very good, but a lot of it, particularly in the franchise leagues, at times is a bit of name, because people are trying too hard to sensationalize something that isn't sensational. So you have to understand that a bit. I'd blame producers actually more. I don't think there's enough good production. We were very lucky at Channel 4 with Gary Francis, who was a master and very good at understatement and explaining it. It's very interesting. It's the sort of thing you could do a thesis on, I suppose. Quite an interesting thing. I don't know if that helps. Though I'm glad you enjoyed the Rain Delay podcast, because I did.
Yeah, it was truly excellent.
I did a series of 10 with the Entail app on all in different walks of life. There was a bit of food, a bit of business, a bit of money, a bit of cricket, a bit of football, even Piers Morgan. Now we've got to decide what to do next, and I might have to go to a different publisher or provider to try to. We're not quite getting the audience we hope that we'd get, and it's quite a lot of work. And of course, you're ringing quite big names and asking for the favour of doing it. So you want to make sure the platform is broad enough for them to justify it. And so I'm trying to work out what the best route is for a next series of podcasts, because I do enjoy them. I do enjoy engaging with the subject and trying to get the best out of him. I've always loved interviewing. And clearly, by the fact that I'm still answering this question, I must love talking too much as well. So I hope that helped. Please feel free.
It did seem though. It did seem like, because you knew your interviewee so well, be it David Frostson, etc., that there was a far more human side to the interview. It wasn't just a Q&A. It was a chat about old times.
Oh, good. Well, that's what Rory Bremner said. He rang me after the show that he did with me. And he said, you made it feel like I was just having a chat with you. He said, I was very nervous. I said, Rory, please. He said, no, I was. I was. Not sort of my field. So I was nervous about being asked things that I might not be able to answer, particularly about your 15 quick-fire questions and stuff. But he said it, I felt relaxed, which I thought was a compliment.
Mark, thank you so much. We're going to give Fingers the last word, but before I hand over to Fingers, let me say personally thank you. There will be a recording of this available very shortly after we finish. If you want to get the link to that, go on to the MCC-MIOLP.net. That's the link up there, and that will be available in about 5 or 10 minutes. And just to remind you as well before we go that next Monday, we have the last in the present series of Q&As with Sir Andrew Strauss OBE. That's Monday, July the 13th at the usual time of 6 p.m. So, John, would you like to propose a formal vote of thanks and wind up for us?
It won't be very formal, but I would love to issue a vote of thanks. I think, Mark, you have made that. I think in diplomatic terms, it would be known as the Tour d'Horizon. It was the most fascinating, most enjoyable tour of all aspects of the game we all love so much. And you were so open in answering it, and I think it has been the most pleasurable of. It's wrong to compare, but of all these talks, I've enjoyed this one personally the most. And thank you for doing it. The one thing I should have done at the outset was referred to Charles to Shine. You did once or twice, but of course you created it with 1 or 2 benefactors, and it was very much your baby. And it has been, I think, the most brilliant thing. It might be having a tough time working, but it would have been an awful lot worse without it. So I congratulate you on that. And I did notice, looking around the screens, that I'm not the only one who got to the barber yesterday. So you're all looking a little bit more kempt, and so am I. One final piece of information, piece of news. We were possibly going to have an exciting guest after Sir Andrew Strauss. James, I know you don't like titles, but he is Sir Andrew to you.
No, he called
we were going to look for a possible last guest, but in fact, the next possible guest is going to be opening the next season, probably in October. And I spoke to her and communicated with her this morning, and I'm very hopeful that Claire Connor will open the batting for us at the next one as our President and as the Managing Director of England Women's Cricket, as the last one will have been the former Managing Director of England Cricket. So you'll hear all about it when we got a date with her, probably at October. But in the meantime, Mark, thank you so much again. It's been absolutely brilliant. Well done.
Really kind.
Thank you. And would everybody like to unmute themselves and give Mark a round of applause? You can unmute yourself now. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.